unless we have the capacity to be creative, unless we have the capacity to think things through, unless we have the capacity to be empathetic and curious and socially intelligent.
We live in expectations, right? Every single second of our life is expectation. This is neuroscience. And if these expectations don't get addressed,
We all want to be energists. We don't want to be energy vampires. We don't want to suck energy out of people. We want the people that we care about, that we spend time with, to...
hell, to some degree, is when you close your eyes and think that...
Lucio has said to me, it's not your job to be perfect. Your job is to...
Welcome back to the second series of Unfiltered. This is the show where we celebrate the imperfect, the unvarnished, and the unashamedly raw journeys that shape our growth. We're bringing you dynamic duos who've propelled each other forward through thick and thin. This series is going to be bigger, bolder, and this time, thanks to our friends at the Marketing Academy, global. Ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of the second series of Unfiltered. I am joined by Lucio and Sean. You might remember Lucio from season 1, backed by popular demand. Lucio is a founder, an entrepreneur, an innovator, a Forbes columnist, a university lecturer, a mentor, a South by Southwest speaker, has held a raft of senior executive roles at large-scale media and telco industry brands, including Optus 7 and 9. He is also one of the most meta people I've ever met. Sitting across from me is Sean. Sean is a prolific lecturer and researcher. How good is this into the future of performance and leadership? Recently conducting some really impressive research with the University of Technology on how great leaders leave people well. He has held numerous very impressive executive roles at the intersection of technology and well-being, which led him to found Energist, an AI and human performance coaching company. Sean and Lucio are self-identified friendtors, and just from the very short time I've seen you two interact, I think demonstrate the incredible potency of harnessing shared belief and a deep-seated shared philosophy. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I can't wait to see where this goes. But I think, look, the logical place to start is where this duo kicked off. What's the earliest memory of your interaction together? Lucio, I might start with you.
Yeah, well, I met Sean before he met me.
Okay.
This goes back about 10 years ago. I was trying to get into the Marketing Academy, and I first tried, it didn't happen. So anyway, I was really after feedback, and I was harassing everyone to give me feedback. And I crashed the one of the parties they had, and then I listened to Sean speaking. And that maybe 10, 15 minutes we spoke, it changed my life. And the context was about taking responsibility. And I think that led me into this 10 years research and 10 years questioning myself about what it means becoming responsible. So that's what I met Sean as inspiration. And then from inspiration, he became a supportive friend. And then, I don't know, I see Sean more as a friend, mentor, counselor, all the above. What is your memory of me, Sean? I never asked you that.
Yeah. I think you're sometimes surprised how, like, just when you share something that you care about or you believe, how that can actually make an impact on people sometimes. And I think that was probably one of the first things where I sort of had that experience with Lucio, where I was like, oh, wow, I just thought that was a personal belief, but to see that actually moved someone just... And in many ways, because I was just paying forward what I had been learning in the Marketing Academy as well. But for me, like when I think about at us, you know, I think for me, it's very much about a deep trust and mutual admiration. That's why I sort of use that word friendtor, you know, because we can be both either simultaneously or independently. You know, I've slept on Lucio's couch when I needed a place to stay, you know, and that's never been a question. But then when we've had some difficult times as well, you know, one of the first people we call. So it's very much on the personal as well as the professional, and just being able to have those conversations sometimes that you feel, you know, you talked about meta before with Lucio, you know, I think sometimes you can spend a lot of time in your head, sort of seeing connections perhaps that you feel other people are not seeing, and then struggling to get people to see that picture. And with Lucio, I've never had that problem.
If you could distill, I might stay with you, Sean, on this. If you could distill, you guys have known each other for a decade now. Knowing what you know now, and if you could distill what Lucio brings to you in terms of filling your cup into its essence, what would that be?
It's almost like they're almost an extreme example of being seen and heard.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Like just that when, like, I'm really appreciated for who you are, and I think like there is that thing where I guess in some situations you don't feel like you can be yourself completely, especially in the most vulnerable stuff when you're worried about things. And like when I slept on his couch, I was like, my whole life had been turned upside down in about 6 months with a combination of like a big client letting me down, and then having some personal stuff with my mum getting diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and I had this whole part. I guess this whole plan that I had. I was supposed to be moving to Barcelona, and literally everything within that period just started. I had to start from scratch and come back to Sydney, and it was just like, where do I even stay? Because I literally was living out of suitcases. Like I'd left my whole life behind, and I think, there's not many people that I think that I could just go, or that would just even offer that support, even if they could.
Lucio, the essence of what Sean brings to your cup.
I think very similar to Sean. I think that I feel I can have a proper conversation to Sean, and I can feel seen and heard, which is the essence of empathy, right? I think the concept of Brené Brown talks a lot about near enemy of feelings and emotions, right? We confuse, unfortunately, we have very small and short vocabulary for emotions and feelings, and that extends our experience. Our experience is extended by the extension of your vocabulary. If you're going to express yourself, apparently we know how to name about 3 feelings at large: anger, sadness, and happiness, I think. But anyway, coming back, I think the essence is on Sean, I find true empathy. And the concept of near enemy, what I find, unfortunately or fortunately, in some other people, is the near enemy of empathy is sympathy. It's coming from a place of superiority. And there's not even one time that I spoke to Sean, that I can remember at least, that I didn't feel that I could just talk about the things. And it doesn't matter the dimension I felt with him, what is professional. We had many conversations, like purely professional or emotional, psychological. We had, and I feel that I can pick up the phone, or I can just invite Sean for coffee and talk about put my vulnerabilities and say, hi, I feel right now I do not have an idea what to do. What's your view about X, Y, Z? So I think that fundamentally what I feel on Sean is this deep sense of connection, on empathy, because he never weaponized my vulnerability, never turned around there and utilized against me. And it's been 10 years, right? So I feel that Sean, for me, is this deep inspiration and support. I feel very inspired by Sean for what he has done professionally, what has done on his personal life, and that's a lot of similarities as well on our journey.
I mean, the thing that I'm hearing is sort of this radical absence of judgment, right? And it's so hard for us, particularly when someone's laying bare. You just want to get into solution mode, and solution mode often has this, as you said, this near enemy of I've made an assessment or a judgment of the situation. Let's stress test this. Sean, what is one thing you regret not saying to Lucio, and one thing that you regret saying to Lucio?
I honestly don't feel like I've got any regrets. I don't think we've ever left anything on the table, to be honest. And we've had so many different types of conversations as well. I think the other thing, just as I'm sure you would agree with this too, is like Lucio is probably one of the most present people that you can spend time with, and so he's always like, if he's there with you, he's there with you. he probably knows. Yeah, I think he knows more about me and all the stuff that I probably wouldn't share with anybody else. We were just talking about our partners before, and so I honestly would say there's nothing. I've got no regrets at all about anything I've ever said, and I can't definitely about anything I've ever said, and I don't feel like I've ever held back. So
I assume I'm going to get a very similar answer.
Yeah, it's not a very meaty answer. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, but I think that can be a learning point because I'm same with Sean. I don't think I ever held back. Perhaps I have held a few hours because the situation was appropriate, and then we had a conversation after. But never. I don't think that was even held. I know I shared in the first episode this line that I always think about. We live in expectations, right? Every single second of our life is expectation. This is neuroscience. And if these expectations don't get addressed, there becomes frustrations. So then you have a gap to readjust these things. And if you don't readjust the frustration, now becomes resentment. And if you let that for too long, the resentment becomes revenge. And then you start doing things like, I don't know why, I'm going to go on LinkedIn, I'm going to find a new job because I didn't have the courage to talk to my boss, or no, I'm going to cheat on my partner because she or he or they deserve this sort of stuff. What I've done, at least from my side, with Sean and another 2 or 3 deep friends that I have, is I never let the expectation go beyond the frustration. I really adjust that thing. Even I had to wait a little moment, a few hours or a few minutes because the situations, like the feedback, we talked about this then on our first season, on the season I was here with you, that sometimes you should be giving feedback on that specific moment just because it is not the moment. But I think the lesson here for whoever is watching us and listening to us is Sean and I believe that we never had shame in demonstrating our vulnerabilities. I think it was very early in our relationship or friendship that we start telling each other, I love you. And that's like the most basic stuff. Like that's like, okay, what holds you back? I know a lot of friends wanted to tell I love you to me, they just can't. They feel embarrassed so I think the fact that the lesson here, at least that I take, is the fact that we do not have big things unsaid is the thing itself. It's not a bug. It's actually the feature because we never let that become turn into frustration and always adjust and audit their expectation frustration gap.
Yeah. I could add one thing to that. I think like one of the things I'm just thinking is just saying that too is that there's that connection that we both have around this sort of continuing to investigate what it means to have this profound understanding of responsibility. And I think the shadow side of that sometimes is you don't ask for help and you take on, especially your own stuff, right? Like you just feel like processing it yourself. And I feel like I've never had to do that, like it's like the door's always open where that we've always got each other's back. And we will always offer to help, and we might not always take up that offer sometimes, but it's never felt like the same way that I would with people, I guess, that even friends that I've known with a long time, but that haven't sort of thought about that idea of responsibility. But I feel like that's what's connected us from the start and continues to sort of maintain that connection.
I know it's a cliche, but I'm really curious about your perspective on this, Sean, given the work you do at the intersection of well-being and leadership. Is a problem shared, a problem halved?
I definitely believe that. And even, I would say like with the work that I do, a lot of it's about the sort of collective responsibility that we all have as teams to look after each other. So I'd even say it goes even further than halves in some ways, creating a shared language, setting an expectation around those sorts of things. And so I think in a dynamic like this, obviously, definitely, but I think that you can definitely exponentially even grow that further when you take it to a team and leadership level as well.
For those looking at this and going, I want this, right? I see the value in having, what I would call a personal board, right? Someone that can be radically candid with me and show me where, hold the black mirror to my face. How does this come about, right? I'm sure that there, and I'm going to push you on, I know that there is an element of serendipity here and it's organic, but how do you cultivate this for those that are looking to really lean in to having people walk alongside them to come off that island, what would your advice be to them to emulate something that is clearly magnetic like this?
I think you do have to put yourself out there, and you do have to take some risks and be curious about other people as well. So, like, I would say that I've actually, like you said, I've got a board of Friendtors in a way, and it's not even that we're necessarily in contact every week sometimes, but I know if I've got a particular thing that I'm dealing with or advice that I need, I've got these people that I can go to. But I also know that they've got my back in other places as well. So I know that Lucio will be talking about what I'm doing. I'll be talking about what he's doing. We'll introduce people to each other as well. But I do think there's that little bit of courage that's required. If I think about another friend that I've got, is this guy called Kamal Sama.
What? You have another one?
Sorry, mate. Not cheating on you though. Kamal's different.
Okay.
But, and it's the same thing. Like, it was like I shared with him. I met him at a particular point. We were introduced through a mutual friend. But there is a reciprocity, I think, that comes in it as well. And I think that sometimes, people are approaching these types of things with more focused on sort of what they're going to get, where it's not about that. It's actually about what can you learn, about this person and what value you can give back to them, So, I think those two things for me is be curious, be courageous. It's definitely where it needs to start.
I think that one of the things that I look, if I take a view from above to the relationship I have with Sean, and again, similar to other friends, I think there are some common traits there. And I think that this relationship with Sean started and comes back to take responsibility. And I think that what I see a lot in my personal life and in work environment is people trying to change the world, but not really fixing their own room. It's really easy to walk here and say, hey, Sean, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, the tyranny of the shoulds, but yet you have not taken responsibility on your own. And responsibility is, it's like from the moment I heard Sean saying this 10 years ago to where I am right now, I think that's a common thread between Sean and I, that we both progressed throughout the years on the same thread, if you like. But I think that I look to my friends, and I learned from Oscar, one of the quotes from the Marketing Academy, which I respect immensely, the power of listening. And I think that, again, comes back to responsibility. If you want one day to be heard, well, gotta bloody listen first, right? And then understand what's going on. So responsibility, listening. I get very frustrated sometimes when I have a lot of time for people and I invest this time on people, but sometimes I need some folks to listen to what I have to say, right? And I see the near enemy of empathy, the sympathy, and the people okay, and like that not really listening, and your heart feels that. So I think that I would go through to bring this together. Then I would say take responsibility of the said and unsaid things. Take responsibility. Second is learn to listen. You cannot be compassionate or have empathy without listening. And I also think about it keeps coming back. The word comes back to my head is expectation. Sorry, that's a story that I keep remembering. Someone had a meeting with me maybe a year ago, and he was telling me that he got frustrated with his wife because he was very excited with the meeting, the opportunity to do some work with me, and his wife didn't get interest on the meeting. And his understanding of this reaction of his partner was that she was not interested on him. And he was telling to me, and I say, dude, stop right there. Like, I understand what you're saying. These understand where you're coming, but you put expectation, you create it, and then suddenly you drop on her. It's on you. It's not on her. That's the taking responsibility. So I just wanted to tell a quick story. Coming back to bring this to a point is responsibility, listening, and the thing that I learned, and I apply with Sean, and I know he applies with me, is do not ever weaponize someone else's vulnerability. If someone is vulnerable and decides to share with you, you got to be a vault. You got to lock that up and do not weaponize. I told this story. When I had my business, year 8 or 9 of my business, I was burnout. I was depressed, clinically depressed. I announced to my staff, and one of the team members quit later on, saying she didn't want to work. They wanted to work for a weak leader. And this same person was very vocal around animal rights and feminism, and I thought it was a pretty big deal. So responsibility, learn to listen, and connect without weaponizing someone else's openness to you.
I mean, you've provided me the perfect segue when you talk about weak leadership. I want to talk about the mental model of leaders. I think, Sean, this is something that you are heavily involved in, both philosophically, but also right at the cold front of researching this alongside Australia's universities. On one hand, I'd like to know, in your mind, what is the componentry of what makes a great leader? Like strong, weak, these to your point, these labels that we throw out. But what are the hallmarks of a great leader, and how do we see that?
So I think, coming back to responsibility, like a lot of things in life can be very binary in our choice selection. So the way I sort of I talk a lot about energy, right? And I talk about that mainly because I feel like energy is very sort of familiar. It's not a scary conversation. It's very intuitive for people. And so at its essence, I talk about you can either make decisions or actions that energize or deplete, and that's where the idea or the hypothesis came from, that great leaders leave people more well because they're making more decisions that energize people. And what I've had the privilege to experience through the research, I've interviewed about 31 C-suite leaders globally, and what's come through so strongly is a focus on moments and being very present in those moments, and knowing that even if you're having a tough conversation, you can still choose, and that's where the responsibility part comes, and it's a choice to leave that person a little bit better, a little bit more confident, even though they've had to hear something tough, for instance. And so I think sometimes we overcomplicate, leadership in generally. And
here's the 7-part program.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think, and just even in life as well, like I think it can be, there's nothing in the middle, right? Like something might be a little bit energizing, a little bit depleting, but it can't be nothing. And so that in its essence is what I think. And there's been another piece of research that I use sort of contextually when I'm having these interviews as well, which is showing that one of the number one predictors of success for leaders is actually relational energy. So do they nurture, inspire, lift people up? And that's the type of leaders that I think we need more of.
Yeah, I've always been a big believer that leaders are actually just in the business of followership, right? Your job as a leader is to, through that value exchange, pull people toward wherever it is that you are going. Do you think that the fuel mix for what great leaders, bring to the table in a corporation is shifting?
I think it needs to.
Okay.
I really do think it needs to. So I think if we think about things like 62% of Australians are burnt out, and what there is there's a missing capability in leaders to do that shift to leave people more well, because right now leaders are failing to do that. And I think this does come back to that idea around responsibility as well. Who's responsible for what? And I think that often what you do is we get a lot of leaders asking people to take responsibility, and to Lucio's point, not taking responsibility themselves, shifting that responsibility onto people. And so I feel like that's sort of the premise of the work I've been doing, really, is to say this is a capability that's needed. And even if we start to look at, I guess, some of the thought leaders out there, so like say Sam Altman from OpenAI, he sort of says the top 3 skills that we need for AI enhanced future are creativity, critical thinking, and the ability for people to know what people want, and they're all powered by our well-being. Like, and that's even though he's a smart guy, he misses that point, right? But we can't, unless we have the capacity to be creative, unless we have the capacity to think things through, unless we have the capacity to be empathetic and curious and socially intelligent, we're never going to know what people want.
How would you build on that, Lucio?
Oh, do I need to? Do I need to? When
I was about to say, tell me why he's wrong, but I thought...
No, that's I find fascinating when Sean speaks about energy and leadership. I'm continuously learning. It's awesome to listen to speaking. I'd like to hear you then. What's your view of those things? I'm always learning from you as well.
I think, we're doing a lot of work. I think that we are in a resilience crisis. And I think, I like to think of to your point, leaders are now in the business of energy management, right? There are things that drain our batteries, right? They can be people, they can be process, they can be work. There are things that charge our batteries. And I think as leaders, it's on us to know not only when we are draining a battery and how to charge it, but to know at what level the battery caps out. I had a guy in my team a couple of weeks ago come in, brilliant talent, come in and say, I'm going to give 100% every day, right? And I said, no, you're not. I go, there's going to be days where the most I'm going to be able to get from you is 60. And my job is to create a culture where if all you've got is 60, you come and you give 60. I go, if you come in 100 a day, you're going to burn yourself out, because much like a battery, you charge that battery to 100% every night. Over time, the capacity of that battery goes down to 70. And it's funny because and then you have to go to Apple and replace your battery. And we're starting to realize this, right? You can now put caps on your devices to say charge only to 95%, because if you're constantly pushing without giving opportunities to show up with slightly less, you're not playing a sustainable game as leaders. And I think that's becoming a much higher stakes game, because the world's looking a scarier place, where there was this great term that was thrown out the other week, polycrisis, right? We're in there, I share your belief in terms of you've got to be able to label something to really understand a construct, that everything's in crisis, right? And that backdrop, right? That backdrop of everything's being thrown up, everything's being disrupted, everything's a higher stakes game, means that the do nothing scenario is batteries are draining faster and faster and faster.
True.
Right? And so I fundamentally agree. And I think, but I look at it through, my job as a leader is to create an environment where I can optimize, not maximize, but optimize what my people bring over sustained periods of time. And if I can create a workplace that on net charges their batteries, right? Be well by another name. Yep. If on net I'm charging batteries, and my mantra is, all I want is for someone to finish their time in my team or in the work that we do and go, that was like, he really invested in me. I've left a better person, I've left a better leader, I've left a better practitioner.
And I think this is so interesting, because now thinking about, you started at the beginning of the conversation talk about resilience, right? And that's another thing that Sean and I talk and express a lot on our conversations. But one thing that I've kind of matured my thinking around resilience is the fact that I started with this proposition around resilience, that resilience is your ability to recover from setbacks, right? And then as I start reading and researching and take responsibility about things, and sometimes even put myself in a corner and say why I'm not recovering that fast, that I should be recovering, and being quite unfair to me, I came to the realization that it's just half story. The other half of the story about resilience is it's your ability to recover, yes, but also having the system and the support system around you facilitating your recovery. And without that, it's almost impossible having that thing. That's why, again, community, it's one of solutions for the loneliness crisis and resilience. So talking about having, as a leader, having and setting up a system where your your people can feel they can recover, they can deploy resilience because there's a supportive system. And I'm not talking about being like everybody wins medals systems. No, I'm not talking about that. You still can be fair. You still can be asking your team to deliver what you need to deliver, but providing a system where you're not going to be using their vulnerability of your people as a weapon against them. You do have boundaries. You do have respect. You do have principles basis. I think that what happens then, we live in a world that we like to see ourselves as rationalists and our brain first, but actually we are an empiricist world there. Our emotions speak up, and we don't know how to deal with these things. We run away. So you got to be patient with people. Some people we see some of your, when you open up about yourselves, people will interpret this as a weakness. And are you weak? You're talking about being tired. Why do you put the responsibility on me? So as you are, and some of us are a little bit more advanced, I don't know if that's the right word I want to say, but we have studied a little bit more, have researched a little bit more, have put a little bit more time than others. We carry an extra responsibility, and that's called patience. And that's actually, it's on the school of compassion and just being like, you know what I mean? Like I was very stupid. I was very stupid 15 years ago. I said things I deeply regret now looking, but I didn't know better. And I use these in the scheme of leadership and trying to support my team and try to support people around me, not just my team, and understanding that one day they will have the opportunity for this. So it's on me to have extra patience. It's on me to provide a system and to not weaponize and all the stuff I said before.
I think just to, building on that, like if we want people to take more responsibility, what I've seen in the work I've done is just that there's really barriers to that. And one is the first one Lucio's talking about then is if you're not aware of it, you can't take responsibility for it. Like 15 years ago, he said stuff that he regrets, but he didn't know. He wasn't aware, And so when you are aware, you try to do better, hopefully. And then the second barrier, I think, is really about confidence. For people, it's like, do I have the skills, the mastery, essentially, to do that? And the great thing, I think, when it comes to this topic, I guess, around well-being, is that you don't have to be a neuroscientist, you just have to be competent
and human.
Yeah. In some of these skills, and we know, and a lot of the stuff we know, even though we've never really been taught how to be well, we know, but we don't have the discipline around the practice, and that's ultimately what builds our capacity. And then I think that the hardest barrier to responsibility is just if people don't value something, they're not going to take responsibility for it, and so that's, I think, the art and the science sometimes where marketers actually have a big role to play in their organization is because we know how to communicate in ways which can connect people to higher value things that might then pull something along, for instance. And the language part is so important in this. Like I actually always have quite a visceral reaction to the word resilience, mostly because it's used in organizations as a way of shifting responsibility. And I think that when we talk about that, what we're sort of saying is that people aren't, and I'm like, people are very resilient. You don't know the shit that they've dealt with in their life just to be here or turn up today, and you're making these judgment calls or you're setting these expectations that you probably aren't. Or you're diagnosing people and you're not taking responsibility for your impact on them, or have you created the conditions for their success?
So you've touched on I think, the other half of the coin. Lucio, you mentioned, I think having that network around you, right? You're not on an island. I mean, it's the sort of the premise of this series. That's, much like medicine, you've got dealing with the aftermath or, after a diagnosis. The other side of the equation is functional medicine, right? Preventative medicine. And I think you've touched on, you've mentioned confidence, and I see this time and time again. I think one of the strongest indicators of future resilience, and I absolutely agree. I think resilience is weaponized, to use your word, weaponized to shirk our duty as an organization or as leaders to support our staff, our ambitions, our ideas. And I've seen, when people are confident, they can weather storms that when their confidence is rattled, they just certainly wouldn't. The other piece in my mind, and it's one of the things that I've always held pretty close, is this idea of we're carrying so much, right? There's a great young Pueblo Croat, he's a meditator and poet. It's only heavy because you are deciding over and over again to carry it, right? And I think, and I'd love your perspective on this, Sean, but I think that there's something there in the, when the table stakes are higher and we're not confident and we feel as though we're walking on uneven ground or at worst quicksand, we carry more than we need to. And I think there's a preventative measure as leaders that you can build this suspension system where you know, and we were talking about it the other day with some other brilliant leaders on this idea of just letting go and not carrying so much and choosing to pick it up again and again, and helping our staff build that capacity before it gets to crisis management, intervention, resilience training, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it can turn up in different ways too, people carrying those. Like I know for me, when I'm feeling that, it turns up a lot as procrastination, you know? And so like even, you know, in this research, like as I started to do more and more of it, I started to freak out more and more because I was like, suddenly I was carrying this burden, to use your words, right, of all of this collective wisdom of these incredible people and these incredible jobs, and it actually gave me hope again, like because it's one of those, again, it's sort of a paradox, right? Is everyone values well-being, but they don't want to pay for it, you know, and so running a business and well-being, you know, was a struggle for me at times, and so I always would be butting up about people saying the right things, but they're not investing. Right, and so for me, like that, I had to. The way to release that burden is to ask for help, you know, and to realize, okay, Sean, you've never written a book before, you've never done a huge research project before. Who can help you, and to break things down into smaller parts, and then it does come back to that idea of responsibility. If you sometimes the burden can also be small. Like I talk a little bit about paper cut decisions, like energy vampire decisions. You know, these little things that we do over and over again that ultimately lead to these situations where we can't get out of bed, or we're burnt out, or we suffer a breakdown. You know, and it is being aware of those decisions that cumulatively add up to that burden for ourselves.
The constant drip. Starts as a drip, but a drip becomes a trickle becomes a flood. Totally. I want to quickly touch on success. Right, I think, you know, from where you both started together to where you've come now, especially given the work that you do in the intersection of technology and well-being and leadership, and then Lucio, you know, all of the stuff that I know you're at the forefront in terms of thought leadership around the impact of artificial intelligence and what does that mean in terms of around the bend. What's the single biggest lie we tell ourselves about success?
I think I need to think a little bit more, but straight away that comes to my head is the biggest lie is you need to compare yourself. I think that comes to my head straight away. I think that I heard what you're saying before then, and you're talking about confidence and courage and bravery, right? I think that comparison is the killer of confidence.
Killer of joy as well.
Killer of joy. Yeah. I think that the bad comparison, the one that puts you down, because there are obviously I once 10 years ago I looked to Sean on the stage without knowing him, and I said, look, I want to say what he's saying, and I'm gonna pursue that. It's an inspiration, and it is still an inspiration. So that comes to my head straight away. The second thing, I think that unfortunately we subscribe to the American perspective of the success is just on you. If you don't make it, it's your fault. I think these false gods of Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and all these, honestly, horrible people, very successful in their field, but this perception, this false truth that if you're not making, whatever making means, normally professionally, financially, it's your fault and your fault only. I cannot even imagine how many people became depressed and became very frustrated with their own lives because they put themselves. And that's not, man. Look, they really think a dude born in the middle of the favelas back in my home country, Brazil, has the same chance as you, and he doesn't make or she doesn't make it, it's her fault and her fault only? No, I do not buy that. I do not buy. So I think the biggest, very quickly reaction to this, the biggest, the two biggest lies we tell ourselves is that if you don't make it, it's your fault and your fault only. That's not an excuse to not take responsibility, though. But the second thing is the whole not using well the comparison and thinking that comparison, man, people, oh man, I got now, I'm 50 years old now. I just figured out that people are like, everybody's, it's some degree fucked as we are to many degrees. People still figure it out. People still walk into the businesses whether you're C-level or not C-level, and sitting down sometimes and have no idea what to do. And we see just external comparison. So we are the only ones who actually know. As Immanuel Kant said, there's two truths, the internal and the physical truth. And we look at that thing and make judgments. So these are the two big ones.
Yeah, I think, one of my favorite sayings too is the only person you should compare yourself as you yesterday, right? And I would say too, like, where I talk to people, I say, if you want to feel successful, start in your world. You know, not the world or some other person's world or this imaginary sold
Sweep
to
the
us
shed.
world. You know, because if you feel successful in your world, for me, that's about having your best energy for the people that you care about the most. You know, being able to do work that you're proud of each day and knowing that you've delivered that to what you're truly capable of, and then that fills you up. You know, and then if you want to choose to make your world a bit bigger, you can do that, knowing that you've got that foundation. And if you don't want to make it bigger, that should be fine as well. So some of us are going to have grand ambitions, some of us are going to be humble, and that should be equally fine. The sort of topic that I've been, or topic theme label, I guess I've been giving to things is, I think we all want to in some way win, right? Whatever our version of that is and success is, but usually winning comes at a cost to something. And so what I'm trying to do in my work is give people a pathway to win well, is what I call it, right? So how can we achieve whatever we see as our version of success, but do that by still being fully recharged, you know, fully at capacity, being the person we want to be. I talk about being an energist, which is a person that expands their energy and the energy of others. Because I honestly, and this is probably my rose-colored glasses view of the world, but I feel like that's all we all want to be energists. We don't want to be energy vampires. We don't want to suck energy out of people. We want the people that we care about, that we spend time with, to have a positive experience of us, and to you know, to make them feel better about themselves, and to feel better because they're in our presence.
And for someone watching us today going, Sean, I'm picking up what you're putting down, what would be your practical advice to sort of get them on the first or the second step on this journey toward, you know, being a net contributor to the energy?
So I think, first of all, just make that choice. Do you want to be an energy vampire or an energist? You know, and that really is just that binary decision making, that choosing to take responsibility for all those micro decisions that go either way. And that doesn't mean being perfect. Actually, talk about burden before, like Lucio, I felt a real burden to be perfect in this sort of well-being space, right? To be that role model. And Lucio was, I don't know if you remember this, said to me, it's not your job to be perfect. Your job is to inspire change in people. And I was like, oh my God, it's such a relief, you know, to have that.
Exhale.
Okay, so I can still enjoy tequila. Great. You know?
You can be perfect and still enjoy tequila.
And so I think it is that, just those micro moments, right? Just make those decisions about, and if you can look back on your day and go, today, what were the proportion of decisions I made that were energist decisions versus energy vampire decisions? And that's everything from how you choose to talk to yourself, to how you choose to talk to others, to who you spend your time with, to did you get enough sleep, to did you move, like all of those. This is a little glass of energy, you know, those types of things where you're just going, how many of those decisions did I make? And then just starting to give yourself, I guess, being patient again with yourself to actually start to shift that balance. And then knowing that, you talked about sort of this perfectionism before about trying to be 100%. You know, if you have enough energy 8 out of 10 days, life's going to be pretty good.
Yeah.
Right. And there's law of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
You
Take
know,
the two.
for trying to get to that 10 all the time. and so just taking some of the burner off again, just saying that's okay. Like 8 out of 10 is pretty good. You can still, then that means that you've got a little bit of spare that on those times where you need to be 10 out of 10, it'll be there.
Lucio, what would your practical tips be?
I spend a lot of time investing in myself and studying and learning and building communities. And again, the self-interest on there, obviously, it's my own survival and actually doing good. And I think that's my number one thing for others. I think that put yourself, if you want to find joy, in this case joy, I would say the absence of conflict in your head at least, learn what the hell is conflict in you. Because we are full of conflicts, right? We're full of conflicts. So learn first to determine that. I always tell people, like, one of the things I really love is Brené Brown book, because I told about her before, the Atlas of Heart. Yeah, it's a great start. It's a really good start. You go to the book, it's light, it's nice. It's a little bit thick, but it goes through all the emotions and explain those things. And you might be thinking, as like, I'm a CMO or I'm a marketing director, I really don't have time for this. That should be massive priority for you. If you have time to read How Brands Grow, you should have time to read that because you're dealing with emotions and people and all this stuff. So number one is really invest in you. One thing I cultivate along these years, Dan, and I'm still learning to do, is sometimes I get very frustrated with people. We all do. But I really try to, and I fail a lot of times, I try to look someone in the eyes and just think, what the heck is this person going through right now that I have no idea? And 9 of 10 times that person is going through things. I just moved house and I had this guy coming just to do some work at home, this straight guy, and he wasn't doing a great work. I'd be frustrated with him. I just called him to the side, say, "Do you want a coffee?" All this stuff. Anyway, short story, he was dealing with his daughter with cancer, 25 years old, 26 years old, and I was ready just to have a little storm with this guy. So I think that invest in ourselves beyond just the technical thing. Have true empathy for people. Before you go and someone shared a challenge with you or problem with you, before you go and try to be the Superman or Supergirl and try to save the person, just ask how the person would like to be supported. And I think that don't work hard. Like I work really hard for my things, work hard, but understand that, if you don't want to, understand that there is a lot of randomness in life. There's a lot of randomness in life. I do not subscribe on the things that things are on the thought that things have been premeditated and selected. I think there's a lot of synchronicity in life. There's a lot of luck, perhaps. And obviously, they would say that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I agree with that. You got to do your part. But there's a massive element of randomness in life. So accept that, but prepare yourself. Be compassionate and use empathy with people, and accept that sometimes you have bad moments. The good news is they finish.
Yeah. I think that there's something. It's amazing how much brighter the world is when you're generous with your assumptions. To your point, you just don't know, and the weight that the rage or the anger that kind of just washes away when you just presume that if I'm generous with my assumptions that there's something that's way more important, and they told you that at that point in time. It's amazing that like the fire cools down. Right? We're wrapping the episodes this season with a bit of not a game, but a bit of a structure. And I've got 3 big questions plus one. And I'll alternate. I'll give you an opportunity so that, someone gets a first mover advantage.
Well, get the intelligent questions to Sean first and the simple ones for me.
Sean, what's the single most important question we should be asking ourselves?
The one I think is like, it sort of comes from a place of self-compassion for me. So, what do I need to do to look in the mirror and say, I like what I see?
I love that. I think that's a tough question. I think that it's the right question, but what is the single most important question we should be asking ourselves?
I can think so many, but at this point in my life, what I'm thinking is, was that worth it? Or is that worth? And it helps me a lot to pick up my battles. To and things like, I don't know, I was a few days ago was giving a presentation in a room for about 30 very senior CMOs, and I was in a panel with other very senior guys, and I was very anxious. I was talking about AI, and I was very anxious because I started projecting this seniority, and everything I'm gonna say is stupid, and like, oh, these guys already know all these things. I was anxious, and I started having a lot of doubts about myself. And my question was, is that worth being stressed and anxious right now? And it didn't solve all the anxiety, but actually brought back me to a point that I could take control again. So right now in life, what I'm asking to myself is this worth being so upset about it, be so angry about it? Or was that worth having that discussion with my partner? Wasn't? Okay, great. It's a great opportunity for you to go there and apologize with a coworker or a business partner. It doesn't matter. So that's what I'm thinking right now.
Lucio, I might stay with you. What's the most important thing to let go of?
Pride. I think pride. The false. I think I am proud of everything I've achieved. I'm not proud about a lot of stuff that I've done. My history with alcohol, my history with victimizing myself, a whole lot of stuff. I'm not proud at all. But I think the false. The false sense of I don't know what would be the word, but the false sense of pride that nothing can, like, I'm the best AI guy in the world, and nobody has anything I have nothing to learn from anyone. I think that I'm not quite sure how to put that in a better way, but I am becoming more. I think the curiosity occupies a space that vanity is probably a better word than pride. I think that as you start making space for curiosity, vanity starts shining away and starts fading away, and I think that's a good place for me in my life right now, to let a little bit more the false sense of vanity to become just to be a thing of the past, and let more space for curiosity.
I think I'm always just saying let go of is just the stuff you can't control.
Okay.
You know, like, I think we just get so caught up in that sometimes, which is human. You know, our brains are hardwired to look for the negative stuff, but especially I think with the polycrisis you were talking about before. I mean, like, we can't control much of that stuff, but what we can control is how we look after ourselves, how we look after each other. Are we, putting out stuff into the world that we're proud of?
Yeah, I love that, Sean.
Sean, what is a life well lived?
Wow. Like, for me, it's about impact.
Okay.
Like I said before about your world versus the world, and I think, like, and this is what I mean, like, if you choose to make your world small, but you have a positive impact on those people around you that you care about the most, like, that for me is a life well lived. If you choose to make that world bigger and have a bigger impact, then again, that's a life well lived. And if you could do it while keeping yourself well,
yeah,
then
it's nirvana.
Yeah, totally.
Lucio, what is a life well lived, mate?
It's a life where you have been at service of others. It's a life where who you became doesn't conflict with who you could have been. But being at service, there's nothing more fulfilling in my life than being at service. Obviously, there are times and times that you need to preserve your energy. And I learned a lot about energy with Sean. The concept, my last 3 weeks, I had to retrieve myself. I could not be at anybody's service because I need to be at my own service. I need to be attending to my moving houses and job requirements, and my partner needed some attention. But as a general rule, being at service and making peace to, like, I always think about hell to some degree is when you close your eyes and think that who you are conflicts to who you could have been. And then you live in a dream that's not actually, live in a nightmare land without a lift back to the reality. And that's, my friend, it's hell.
That's a great answer. I've never heard it articulated quite like that, but I really like the way that you've said that.
I hope I don't bring everybody down.
No, but it's such an interesting way to anchor. You know, looking at yourself and living. You know, hell would be where you look at yourself and there's this dissonance to the person that you could have been. Okay, now for the plus one, Lucio. What was the one question I should have asked you both but didn't?
Oof, that's a hard one. I hardly have. I normally have answers for things. I feel so at home with you, Dan, and with Sean. It's so at home. Like, feels like I could. I'm thinking like, oh, please, don't stop this podcast right now. Let's keep going because it's such a good conversation. I think that I would love to have more questions about Sean's background to the extent he would be comfortable sharing. Because I think it's a beautiful story. I think that's it's a story of resilience, of winning, of responsibility, and of a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful human being that Sean is. And I think that the questions I'd love to hear from your next interview, podcasts would be, I think we are a collection of our past, or facts and the things that happened to us in the past, and also there's also an element of biology. And I really love Sean's background story. I think that's beautiful, and everything, how elegant, and he came like a ballet dancer that falls and comes back, and graciously sometimes it's very painful.
Agile and dainty.
And agile and like very...
No one's ever called me dainty.
Sean, what was the one question I should have asked you both but didn't?
I think one of the things that connects us, and we were talking about this sort of before as well, is just like, we both sort of... Lucio's the first person to say to me that my sort of approach to life was quite stoic in the way, and I think a lot of that is about that idea of taking responsibility and things like that too. And I think sometimes there's that perception that it's about being emotionless, whereas it's absolutely not. It's about actually taking responsibility for your emotions, choosing to respond versus react, and actually, to the Brené Brown example as well, really having a very diverse emotional vocabulary that allows you to, I think, better and fully experience the world.
I would have loved to have spent 45 minutes discussing stoicism, and for those that want to chase that rabbit down the hole, where would you start from a stoic perspective? What's the first stoic text? Just to give, if someone wants to follow up on this, because I think it's a profound philosophy for leaders.
My most well-worn one is this Ryan Holiday. It's like 365 days. You literally can just open it up to any day of the year, and there's a quote from one of the Stoic texts, but then there's a sort of interpretation, and I find that sometimes on those days, and not that I would ever open it sort of every single day, but there's just days where I think this will just ground me, whatever, and it's one of those sort of serendipity, synchronicity sort of things. Like sometimes it's whatever I'm dealing with, it's like, how the hell does this book know what the answer is for me right now? So, I think
great piece of follow-up literature for those tuning in. Lucio, Sean, thank you so much. We could chat for hours, I know, but I want to be very respectful for our audience as well. So Thank you genuinely both for coming in. It's been an absolute blast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having the opportunity to be here with you and my best friend, Sean.
Yeah.